Well, good morning, friends. I want to talk to you today about something tremendously important to Jesus' ministry and tremendously important to our own lifeblood as Christians. And that is compassion. Say compassion. Yes. Before the breaking of bread, before the curing of the sick, before the message he was sure to give and the liberation he was sure to bring, we read in Mark, as he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. He had compassion for them. This is not an isolated incident, folks. We're told that it's compassion that moved the king to mercy in the parable of the unmerciful servant. It's compassion that moves Jesus to heal the blind men. It's compassion that leads Jesus to heal the leprous. It's compassion that prods Jesus to heal the boy with the evil spirit. It's compassion that stirs Jesus to raise the widow's dead son. It's compassion that moves the good Samaritan to aid his enemy. It's compassion that causes the father to run to his prodigal son from far off. Compassion. How interesting it is that as often as we read of the Spirit prodding Jesus to movement, so too do we see compassion. This phrase that we're relying on, the one translated most often as he had compassion, derives from one Greek word. It's one of my favorite Greek words. It's splagchnizomai. Say splagchnizomai. I love this one, you Greek scholars. This is great. So this word is interpreted as some form of to feel compassion, but most literally it means to be moved in the inward parts, to be moved as to one's bowels, one's splagna. It's funny, you've never heard of splagna, but you totally picture what splagna are in the body when I say that word. The entrails, the movement. And I've told you before that we in the West, we associate the heart with the seat of emotions, right? I love you with all my heart. But this was not the case for ancient peoples. The Greeks refer to these nobler entrails. So the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, liver, all these things. And interestingly, in the Old Testament, when you encounter a moving of the heart, its literal reading is a moving of the kidney. This was the seat of emotions for the ancient people. You know that pit in your stomach when something bad happens? You know that churning feeling when raw emotion hits? We've all had that gut-wrenching experience or those butterflies in the stomach. What scientists tell us is a brain-gut connection associated with a fight or flight response we have come to recognize as a physiological indicator that something is different. Something is moving in us. Something is worth paying attention to. Compassion. We hear talks of empathy a lot now, and empathy is important. Empathy involves understanding and sharing the feelings of another person. Empathy means stepping into the shoes of another. It is good and necessary to have empathy. But compassion goes a step further. Compassion involves not only recognizing another's suffering, but also having a desire to alleviate that suffering. Compassion is an active form of empathy, motivating us to take actions aimed at helping others. Compassion is an action word. This undeniable physical sensation is what we're told Jesus had when he saw those in the crowd. Splagchnizomai. He had compassion for them. He experienced feeling, emotion, churning, empathy when he saw these crowds, to such a degree that it moved Jesus to action. When we consider what's going on in his life, this is more astonishing, right? In verse 32 of Mark, and Matthew reads into this as well, we read, "When Jesus heard this, he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard that he had moved, they followed him on foot to the towns." Well, what is it that Jesus heard that causes this movement? Matthew's gospel tells us that John the Baptist, Jesus' friend, Jesus' cousin, Jesus' baptizer, had been beheaded. Jesus is mourning. It's why I think he insisted that they come away to a deserted place all by ourselves and rest a while. We read in that 32nd verse. In this very moment, Jesus is trying to get away. He's trying to get rest. He may be trying to get away from watchful eyes as this revolutionary. Yet even in his pain, even in his struggles, he finds compassion for others. Every day I cross the intersection at 19th and Market. I think of Z every time I do so. He works right there. And every day I hear the cries of those in need at this busy corner. There are 2 food trucks there, and they are always very crowded. I see you guys know the food trucks I'm talking about. Huddled beside the food trucks are those crying for charity. Well, some years ago when I was new to the city, I think I was just a year in, one of the women who I know now as a regular at this corner caught my attention. And I've met and even fed her a few times. But I never had the courtesy to ask her name. I'd written her off as incommunicable due to the illness that I perceived in her. See, this woman goes by many, many names, and downtown she's most commonly called Screaming Woman. If you live down here, you've probably heard, you've heard of or heard Screaming Woman because of the intense wails that this woman lets out at all hours of the day and night. And this particular day, as she was continuing with her screaming, I felt her look at me through my peripheral vision while I'm, of course, trying to not make eye contact. And I hear the words out of her mouth, "Have you no food? I'm starving." I hear this all the time. We hear this all the time. This is part of living in an urban environment and perpetually balancing the ethic of compassion with a need to be boundaried, adhering to our own responsibilities and limitations. You all know it's difficult. I don't usually have anything to give away anyway, but this Tuesday was an exception, for, no lie, that morning I had walked out of my apartment, I had walked down the hall, and in between apartments was a fresh $20 bill on the ground. So that's when my stomach moved. That's when my heart started churning. And as I stood at the corner waiting for my light to cross, I found myself in deep deliberation. And I changed my footing. I crossed the other way. I went right to my favorite halal cart, that big yellow one. I went and I said, "Lamb and chicken on rice." I tell you, friends, that when I brought that hot meal over to the screaming, intimidating, disheveled woman, everything changed about her. The screaming stopped, the incoherence abated, and the biggest smile spread across her face. "Hi, I'm Maybell. What's your name?" she asked. We talked for a short while about the weather and about the attitude of the city, and then we parted ways. And the next day I went to the same corner and I expected to find Maybell, but she wasn't there. A few days later I was walking by City Hall and I saw her, incoherent rambling, begging for food. And I had to sit there and process this. And as I did so, I thought to myself, if only I could have held on to her for a little longer. If only I could have loved her a little more. If only we could have stayed connected in this unity for just a few more minutes, perhaps the deliverance that I had seen would not have been so momentary. Perhaps it would have been more lasting. I dare say that for a short sliver in time, some semblance of wholeness or love had come into Maybell's life that she hadn't experienced in some time. You and I know, as social scientists have been telling us in the most recent decades, that empathy, that communication, that relationship, that love can change someone to the core in the most literal sense. Friends, compassion can change the world. There are those who say, "You're a scientific mind, James. Don't you think that Maybell is a case better handled by psychiatrists and psychologists, doctors and social workers?" And to such a question, of course, we can only answer, but of course. But of course. In fact, that's one of the first places we should go. The psychologist, the doctor, the social worker should all have a chance at bringing wholeness. But I do have to say, friends, that after they have done all that they can, and if they were still to yield no healing, I am still ready to declare that there is a balm in Gilead that heals the soul. There is a force that can change the world. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called it love. We see compassion as its root. What I propose this morning is that as Christians, it's not just compassion that we experience. It's compassion and. Because for Jesus, compassion is not an isolated experience. It's not just the presence of a feeling. It is a feeling followed by an action. It doesn't read, "He had compassion," the end. It reads, "He had compassion and." He had compassion and he did something. Jesus was moved to action, not because of convenience or good timing or because he felt like it. Mostly we read that Jesus is trying to break away from people when he has these movements of compassion. He had compassion and he feeds the hungry. He had compassion and he heals the sick. He had compassion and he loves the ostracized. He has compassion and he does something. It is compassion that stirs us to mobility when we do not feel mobile. It is compassion that tells us to do that extra act. It is compassion that causes us to dispense that extra grace. It is compassion that will change the world around us. But unfortunately, I believe that we have become numb to compassion. I believe that we have long since forgotten that the physical sensation of compassion is our body's way of telling us that something is happening, that something is going on, that something need be done. I believe that we frequently rationalize our compassion away. Oh, this isn't for the best. Oh, they won't become self-reliant. Oh, they'll use the money I give them for drugs or something that I don't approve of. Our imaginations can get wildly creative when challenging movements of compassion in our life. But fortunately, like your Creator, you are a creative being. We have faculties for discerning wisdom when compassion moves. And when it does, we can figure out ways to act, ways that are loving, ways that address problems, ways that don't sacrifice ourselves to a point that we can't exist any longer. But we must never become numb to the cries of our sisters and brothers near and far. We must always be responsive to compassion. Jesus tells us that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. Friends, I tell you that the Lord of the harvest has been asked to send out laborers. Cries for help go upward to heaven. And here you are, in answer to prayer. There's a make-believe story set in an American city during World War II, during which a program was organized to train volunteers in first aid skills. There was a fear that if the city should be bombed or under attack, there wouldn't be adequate medical care available for the people to help the wounded. So they had this class, and there was one woman in the class who seemed bored and detached from everything that was being taught. She was there out of a sense of obligation because she had to be there, but she had no enthusiasm for learning. But one day, this particular woman showed up to the first aid class abounding with enthusiasm. She could hardly contain herself as she told the others in the class the source of her newfound excitement for the course. And she said, This class never meant much to me until yesterday. You see, yesterday I was sitting on my front porch eating my breakfast when there was a horrendous automobile accident right in front of my house. The cars smashed into each other, metal wrapped around metal, bodies were thrown through the air. Everywhere there were people who were seriously injured, and I saw blood everywhere I looked. The scene was horrible. It was horrible, so horrible that I almost fainted. But then I remembered what I learned in this class. And I put my head between my legs and I didn't pass out. It's obvious that the woman had missed the point. She was not supposed to learn first aid simply to take care of herself, but to be equipped to take care of others also. And many do not realize that the reason we are nurtured in the Christian faith is not just so we can handle the stresses and strains of our own personal lives, but that we might be ready to meet the needs of others who suffer around us. We are nurtured by God so that when we feel compassion, we are equipped to respond. Friends, may we be those who feel compassion, who feel the heart of God and move. May we be the laborers sent to the harvest that Jesus talks about. May we be those who have compassion and. You might have noticed I have some tan on me. I was driving home from the beach, and I was reminded of a Coast Guard unit stationed at Cape May, New Jersey. One night, a hurricane blew in from the Atlantic Ocean, and a ship began breaking up just off the Cape May coast. And the commander of the unit woke the people under his command, and he told them to prepare to go to sea. One of the young recruits, great fear in his voice, shot back, "But Captain, if we go out there, we may never come back." To this the captain replied, "You don't have to come back, but you do have to go out." This is the call of the Christian. This is hard, this is risky, this is the journey. I walk down the street and every day I hear, as you do, the familiar cry, "Change! Change!" And I always think about this message from my mentor, Tony Campolo. And it makes me think with a pained expression, I'm trying. Sisters and brothers, I want to challenge you today to not think of compassion as an isolated experience. I want to challenge you to remember that compassion is only the first part of a whole movement, an indicator that something is to be done. I want to challenge you to never have compassion in isolation, but to always have compassion and. There's an apocryphal story that describes Jesus returning to heaven after his sojourn on earth. And he arrives and the angels excitedly gather around him to find out about all the things that had happened on earth. And Jesus explains to them how he lived among the people, how he shared his teachings, how he expressed his love, how he died on the cross, how he was resurrected to declare that the new kingdom is at hand. And when he finished telling the story, Michael the archangel asked Jesus, "Well, what happens now?" And Jesus said, "I left behind a handful of faithful women and men. They will tell the story. They will express love. They will demonstrate compassion. They will spread our kingdom." But what if they fail? What if they fail? Asked Michael. What will be the plan then? To which Jesus replies, "There is no other plan. This is God's plan. You are God's plan." Ours is the responsibility to be God's instruments. Ours is the responsibility to spread God's kingdom. Ours is the responsibility to be the light of the world. Ours is the responsibility to have compassion and move. Friends, we are the church. And the church is not a building. The church is not a social club. The church is not a social institution. The church is everyone everywhere who confesses Jesus Christ as Lord and lives out that confession. And the church is God's plan for combating the travesties, the horrors, the evils of this world. My question is, what are we going to do about it? How will we act as the church in a restless, scary, upturned world? And when the churning of your heart echoes the churning of God's, how will you respond? This week I want to challenge you to give into the movements of compassion in your life. I challenge you to have compassion, and when you feel that churning, consider it. When you feel that movement, ponder it. When you feel a stirring in your heart, think to yourself, maybe I should do something, whatever that may be, and do it. As the Apostle Paul writes to the believers in Colossae, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Brothers and sisters, clothe yourself with compassion and in whispers of the morning light, a love so pure, a beacon bright. Compassion flows like morning dew in hearts where kindness holds its hue. He healed the broken, soothed their pain. In every tear he felt the rain. Fed the hungry, calmed the strife. In every act he breathed new life. Love each other, our Lord did say. In every heart his Spirit stays. To be like him in deed and thought, with Jesus' love our hearts are taught. So let us walk this path with care, with love to give and hearts to share. In every act of gentle grace, we glimpse the light of Jesus' faith. Go into the world with compassion and let us pray. Oh God, we thank you. We thank you for your moving in our lives, and we thank you for you moving in us personally. We thank you for movements of compassion. We thank you that there are indicators that can remind us not only of the tremendous joy, but the tremendous pain that can exist in this world. We ask, Lord, that you give us the courage and the hearts to be your hands and feet, to step out into the world, as scary as it may be. Bless us, Lord, to have compassion and in your name we do pray.